They didn't ask her name. They just assumed she didn't belong. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed sharper than the sirens, a cold sound that seemed to slice straight through the night air as red and blue lights washed over the polished surface of the black luxury coupe parked along the curb, its chrome details catching every flash like a silent witness. Aaliyah Carter stood still, her wrists pulled gently but firmly behind her back, her fingers curling instinctively as the steel tightened, not resisting, not pleading, just breathing slow and controlled. As if she'd practiced this moment before, though she hadn't, not exactly like this, not in front of a crowd gathering faster than she could process. Phones already raised, lenses pointed, whispers forming a low hum that spread across the sidewalk like static. She could feel their eyes before she heard their voices, feel the weight of judgment settling on her shoulders heavier than the officer's grip, a pressure that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with expectation, the kind that decided who looked right in a place like this and who didn't, the kind that turned a 19-year-old girl standing next to her own car into something suspicious without a single word being spoken. Step away from the vehicle. The officer had said it first, not unkindly, but not questioning either, just certain, and that certainty lingered in the air even now as another officer circled the car, glancing at the interior through the tinted glass like he was searching for proof of a story already written in his head. Aaliyah's gaze drifted, not to the crowd, not to the flashing lights, but to the driver's side door, to the handle she had touched just minutes ago, the same handle she'd run her fingers over earlier that afternoon when the sun was still high, when the dealership lot had smelled like fresh polish and new beginnings, when the keys had been placed in her palm, and for a moment the world had felt wide open, like possibility had a shape, and she could finally hold it. Now, that same hand was cuffed, her palm empty, her shoulders squared as she forced herself not to shrink, not to disappear the way a small part of her wanted to, because shrinking never helped, disappearing never protected, it only made people more certain they were right about you. A laugh broke somewhere in the crowd, quick and careless, followed by a voice low enough to pretend it wasn't meant to be heard, and Aaliyah felt it land anyway, sharp and familiar, like something she'd learned to carry without showing. She swallowed once, slow, steady, her jaw tightening just enough to hold everything in place, because if she let it slip, even a little, if her voice shook or her eyes dropped, it would confirm what they already believed, and she refused to give them that. The officer adjusted his grip, guiding her a step forward, and the movement brought her closer to the car, close enough that the reflection of the flashing lights rippled across its surface, and for a split second she saw herself there, small but unbroken, framed by chaos that didn't belong to her. And that's when she inhaled, deep and deliberate, grounding herself in the one thing no one had asked for but she knew was there, the truth sitting quietly beneath all the noise, waiting, patient, undeniable, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost quiet, but it cut through everything, through the sirens, the whispers, the assumptions, carrying only 3 words that would change the air around her completely. Run the VIN. The words lingered in the air longer than they should have, simple and precise, yet heavy enough to slow everything down. And for the first time since the sirens lit up the street, something shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, just a subtle hesitation that crept into the officer's posture as if the script he had been following suddenly lost a line. Officer Daniel Hayes glanced toward his partner, then back at Aaliyah, his grip no longer tightening. Not loosening either, just uncertain, and that uncertainty spread quietly, moving through the small crowd like a ripple as the whispers softened, curiosity replacing confidence. Aaliyah did not move, did not repeat herself. She simply stood there with her shoulders squared and her gaze steady, her breathing slow enough to keep her voice from shaking again, because she knew this moment mattered more than anything that had happened in the last 5 minutes, more than the cuffs, more than the stares. This was the moment where truth either surfaced or got buried under assumption. Hayes reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder, then stopped, reconsidering, his eyes flicking once more toward the car, toward the sleek black finish that reflected the flashing lights like a mirror that refused to distort. And finally he exhaled, a small, almost reluctant breath before stepping toward the patrol unit where the onboard computer waited, its screen already glowing faintly in the dim light. The other officer followed, still watching Aaliyah, as if expecting her to break, to protest, to give them something to justify what had already been done. But she offered nothing, no anger, no raised voice, just silence that felt stronger than any argument. Inside the patrol car, the door remained open, the radio crackling softly as Hayes leaned in, typing with deliberate care, each keystroke louder than it should have been, amplified by the stillness outside. And Aaliyah could hear it all, the rhythm of doubt forming one letter at a time. She shifted her weight slightly, the metal around her wrists cool against her skin, grounding her, reminding her that this was real, that this was happening, but also that it was about to change. A breeze moved through the street, lifting a strand of her hair across her face, and she let it stay there, her eyes fixed forward, not on the officers, not on the crowd, but on a point just beyond them, somewhere steady, somewhere untouched by the noise. A few feet away, someone lowered their phone, the excitement fading into something quieter, something uncertain, and another voice murmured, softer now, almost questioning, as if the narrative they had accepted moments ago no longer fit as cleanly. Inside the patrol car, the screen refreshed, lines of information appearing in stark black and white, and Hayes paused, his hand hovering over the keyboard as his eyes scanned what was in front of him, once, then again, slower this time, as if reading it twice might change what it said. Outside, the flashing lights continued their relentless rhythm, painting everything in alternating shades of urgency. But the urgency itself was gone, replaced by a silence that felt heavier than the sirens ever did, a silence waiting for acknowledgement, for correction, for something that would either restore balance or expose just how quickly it had been lost. Aaliyah blinked once, steady and controlled, her voice no longer needed, because the truth was no longer hers to prove. It was right there on that screen, undeniable, and the only question left was whether they were ready to face it. The screen did not change, no flicker, no correction, just the same name staring back in clean, official text. And for a moment Officer Hayes did not move at all, his eyes fixed on the line that mattered, registered owner, Aaliyah Carter, the letters sharp and undeniable, leaving no space for interpretation, no room for assumption to survive. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, not in defiance, but in the quiet realization that the certainty he carried into this moment had been misplaced. And outside the car the silence deepened, stretching across the sidewalk as if even the night itself was waiting to see what he would do next. The second officer leaned closer, reading over his shoulder, and the shift was immediate, subtle but unmistakable. A small inhale, a glance exchanged, the kind that said everything without a word, and then both of them stepped back out into the flashing lights. But they did not move the same way they had before. Aaliyah watched them approach, her expression steady, her posture unchanged, though her pulse beat a little slower now, not because the moment had passed, but because it had turned, and she could feel it, that quiet reversal moving through the air like a current. Hayes stopped a few feet in front of her, the distance suddenly noticeable, as if space itself had become something to respect, his hand hovering briefly near the cuffs before lowering again. Unsure for a fraction of a second that did not go unnoticed. Around them, the crowd shifted, phones lowering, voices softening, the earlier confidence dissolving into something closer to discomfort, as if they had all stepped into a scene they no longer understood. Aaliyah's gaze met his, not challenging, not pleading, just present, and that presence seemed to press against the moment harder than any accusation could have. The officer cleared his throat quietly, the sound almost lost beneath the fading sirens, and when he finally spoke, his voice was different, less certain, more measured. "Ma'am," he began, the word itself carrying a weight it had not held before, a small correction, but not yet enough. His fingers moved to the cuffs, this time with care, unlocking them with a soft click that echoed in contrast to the one that had started all of this. And as the metal loosened around her wrists, Aaliyah did not rush to pull away. She simply let her hands fall forward slowly, rubbing one wrist with the other in a calm, deliberate motion, grounding herself again, reminding herself that this moment, too, was real. No apology came. Not immediately, just a pause that stretched longer than it should have, filled with everything unsaid, Everything recognized but not yet acknowledged. A few steps away, someone turned their phone off completely, the screen going dark as if the story they had been recording had taken a turn they were not prepared to follow. Aaliyah glanced once more at the car, at the reflection of the lights that now seemed less chaotic, less accusing, and then back at the officers. Her voice quiet but steady when she finally spoke again, not asking, not demanding, just stating what was already true. That is my car. And this time, there was nothing left in the air to argue with her. Nothing left but the weight of what had already happened and the undeniable truth standing right in front of it. The words settled into the space between them, steady and unshaken, and for a moment no one moved. Not the officers, not the crowd, not even the flashing lights that seemed to slow against the silence that followed, as if the entire scene had been forced to acknowledge something it had tried to ignore. Officer Hayes shifted his weight, his eyes dropping briefly before returning to her, searching for something to say that would bridge the distance between what had just happened and what should have happened. But the words did not come easily, not in a way that could undo the image already burned into the night. A young woman in cuffs beside her own car. Aaliyah let the silence breathe, did not rush to fill it, because she understood something they were only beginning to feel, that truth did not need to be loud to be powerful. It only needed to remain standing when everything else fell away. The second officer stepped back slightly, creating space without announcing it, a quiet acknowledgement that the situation had shifted, that the authority they had carried into this moment no longer fit the reality in front of them. A car passed slowly on the street, its headlights sweeping across the scene, illuminating faces in the crowd that now looked different, less certain, more aware, as if each person had been handed a mirror they did not expect to look into. Aaliyah rolled her shoulders once, small and controlled, easing the tension that had settled. There, her wrists still tingling where the metal had been, a reminder she would not forget, not tonight, not anytime soon. And yet she did not let it harden her expression, did not let it turn her voice sharp when she spoke again. "You did not ask me anything," she said quietly, not accusing, just stating, and the simplicity of it carried further than any raised voice could have. Hayes exhaled slowly, his hand resting at his side, fingers curling slightly, as if holding on to something unseen. And for the first time his posture softened, not in weakness, but in recognition, a subtle shift that signaled he understood the weight of what had just unfolded, even if he did not yet know how to respond to it. Somewhere behind them, a phone lifted again, but this time it was different, not eager, not entertained, just documenting, capturing a moment that no longer felt like spectacle, but like something heavier, something that would not fade as easily as it had begun. Aaliyah's gaze drifted briefly to the car once more, to the reflection of herself now standing free, no longer restrained, and she took a slow breath, grounding herself in that image, because it mattered, because it was hers. The night air felt cooler now, sharper, carrying with it the quiet understanding that this moment was not an ending, not even close, but the beginning of something larger, something that extended far beyond this street, beyond these lights, beyond the people who had witnessed it. Hayes finally spoke again, his voice low, careful, but still incomplete. "There has been a misunderstanding," he said, and the word hung there, thin against the truth that had already been made clear, and Aaliyah heard it, felt it, but did not accept it as enough, because what had happened was not confusion, not really, it was assumption, and she knew that difference mattered more than anything else. She met his gaze once more, steady as ever, and in that look there was no anger, no fear, just clarity, the kind that does not need permission to exist. And in that moment, it was clear to everyone watching that while the cuffs had been removed, something far more significant had been revealed, and it was not going to be put away as easily. The word misunderstanding lingered in the air, thin and fragile, and Aaliyah felt it for what it was, not an explanation, not even an apology, just a shield placed between what happened and what it truly meant. And she let it sit there for a moment before she spoke again, her voice calm but firmer now. "You did not misunderstand the car," she said, her eyes steady on Officer Hayes. "You misunderstood me." And that difference landed heavier than anything else that had been said tonight. The silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was defined, shaped by the truth that had finally been spoken out loud. And for the first time, the crowd did not whisper, did not laugh. They simply watched, as if realizing they were no longer spectators to a moment of entertainment, but witnesses to something that demanded reflection. Hayes shifted again, his shoulders lowering slightly, the weight of the situation settling in a way that could not be ignored, and though his expression remained controlled, there was something else there now, something quieter, recognition, not complete, not comfortable, but present. Aaliyah's hands rested loosely at her sides, no longer bound, but she did not reach for her phone, did not rush to leave, because walking away too quickly would feel like letting the moment disappear, and she knew this was not something that should fade that easily. A faint breeze moved through again, carrying the distant hum of the city, normal life continuing just beyond this street. A reminder that moments like this happened more often than people admitted, slipping in and out of ordinary nights without ever being fully acknowledged. One of the bystanders stepped back, lowering their gaze, and another quietly turned away, as if the reality unfolding in front of them had become too heavy to hold onto through a screen. The second officer cleared his throat softly, stepping a half-pace behind Hayes, no longer leading, no longer certain, and that shift in position spoke louder than any statement could have. Aaliyah inhaled slowly, grounding herself once more, and then she glanced at the car, really looked at it this time. The smooth lines, the reflection of the streetlights along its surface, the quiet symbol of something she had earned, something she had built for herself without shortcuts, without permission, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel that again, not pride exactly, but certainty, the kind that does not need validation. Hayes finally spoke, his voice measured, careful. "You are free to go," he said, and the sentence felt incomplete the moment it left him, because freedom was not what had been taken, not entirely, and returning it did not restore what had been questioned. Aaliyah met his gaze one last time, her expression unchanged, and then she nodded once, not in agreement, not in acceptance, just acknowledgement, and as she turned toward the driver's side door, her steps were steady, unhurried, each movement deliberate, reclaiming space that had been taken from her only minutes before. Her fingers reached the handle again, the same one from earlier, but this time it felt different, not lighter, not heavier, just clearer, as if the moment had stripped away any illusion about what it meant to stand here, to belong here, to be seen here. Behind her, the lights still flashed, the officers still stood, the crowd still lingered, but something fundamental had shifted, something that would not reset when the sirens eventually went silent. And as Aaliyah opened the door and paused for just a second before getting in, she knew this night was not something she would leave behind. It was something that had just begun. The door opened with a soft, controlled motion, and Aaliyah paused just long enough for the interior light to flicker on, casting a warm glow across the leather seats that still smelled faintly new, untouched by anything except the quiet promise of what this car had meant to her only hours ago. And as she lowered herself into the driver's seat, she did not rush, did not slam the door, did not let the moment turn into something reactive. Instead, she moved with intention, every motion deliberate, reclaiming not just the car but the space around her that had been questioned. Her hands rested on the steering wheel for a second, fingers spread lightly against the smooth surface, grounding herself in something real, something earned, and she exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just enough to remind her that she was no longer standing under flashing lights with eyes on her from every direction. Outside, the red and blue reflections still danced across the windshield, but from inside the car they felt distant now, muted, like a scene she was already stepping away from even though she had not driven an inch. She glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the officers still standing there, their posture no longer rigid, no longer commanding, just present, uncertain in a way that did not match how this had begun, and for a brief moment her eyes met Hayes's reflection, not directly, but enough to acknowledge that something had shifted between them, something that could not be undone by silence or a simple release. The crowd had thinned slightly, a few people already dispersing, their interest fading now that the story no longer fit the version they had expected, and the ones who remained stood quieter, their phones lowered, their expressions unreadable, as if they were processing something they had not planned to witness. Aaliyah reached for the ignition, her fingers brushing the key fob, and for a second she hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of awareness, because starting the car meant moving forward, and moving forward meant deciding what this moment would become beyond just a memory. The engine came to life with a low, steady hum, smooth and controlled, a stark contrast to the chaos that had surrounded it minutes ago. And the sound filled the space around her in a way that felt grounding, almost symbolic, like a reminder that control had returned to her hands. She adjusted her grip on the wheel, her posture straightening slightly, and her eyes moved once more to the street ahead, the open road stretching beyond the flashing lights, beyond the officers, beyond the place where everything had shifted. But she did not pull away immediately. Instead, she let the engine idle, letting the moment settle fully, because she understood something now with a clarity that had not been there before, that leaving too quickly would not erase what had happened, and staying for just one more second allowed her to define it on her own terms. Her reflection in the windshield looked different now, not because anything about her had changed, but because the way the world had tried to define her had been challenged, exposed, and quietly overturned, and that realization sat with her, steady and unshaken. Outside, the lights still flashed, but they no longer felt like authority. They felt like background, like something that would fade the moment she chose to move. And as her foot hovered lightly over the brake, Aaliyah knew this was not the end of the night, not the end of the story, but the exact point where it would begin to unfold in a way no one out there was expecting. Her foot pressed gently against the brake, holding the car in place even as the engine purred beneath her hands. And for a moment Aaliyah simply sat there, letting the quiet inside the car wrap around her like a shield, separating her from the noise still flickering outside. Her fingers adjusted slightly on the steering wheel, not gripping tight, not tense, just steady, controlled, as if she was reminding herself that she was the one in control now, not the voices, not the flashing lights, not the assumptions that had tried to define her minutes ago. She glanced once more into the rearview mirror, catching the same scene, but seeing it differently this time. The officers no longer the center of power, the crowd no longer an audience, just fragments of a moment already losing its hold. And yet something about it stayed, something heavier than the lights, something that did not fade with distance. Her gaze shifted forward again, toward the open road stretching ahead, streetlights lining the asphalt in a quiet rhythm that felt almost indifferent to what had just happened, as if the world beyond this block had no idea how quickly everything could change in a single moment. Aaliyah inhaled slowly, filling her lungs with air that felt cooler now, clearer, and as she exhaled, a thought settled in, not sudden, not dramatic, just certain, that leaving would not be the end of this, not for her, not for what this moment represented. Outside, Officer Hayes took a small step back, his posture no longer rigid, his hands resting at his sides as he watched the car, not with authority, but with something quieter, something closer to reflection, as if he too understood that the moment had moved beyond his control. One of the remaining bystanders shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Aaliyah and the officers, then slowly stepping away, the weight of what they had witnessed settling in a way that did not invite commentary anymore. Aaliyah's thumb brushed lightly against the steering wheel, a small, almost absent motion, but it grounded her, anchored her in the present, and she allowed herself one final glance at the reflection in the windshield, her face calm, composed, unchanged, and yet everything around it had been revealed in a way that could not be unseen. She eased her foot off the brake slightly, the car inching forward just enough to feel movement, just enough to confirm that she could leave whenever she chose, but she did not accelerate, not yet, because something inside her told her that this moment deserved more than just departure. It deserved intention. The engine's low hum filled the space again, steady and controlled, and as she sat there, poised between staying and going, Aaliyah understood with quiet clarity that what had happened was not just about a car, not just about a mistaken stop. It was about something deeper, something that followed her into spaces like this without invitation, something that had been exposed under flashing lights for everyone to see. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus, and as her grip on the wheel steadied once more, the decision settled in, firm and undeniable, that this was not a moment she would leave behind in silence. not something she would allow to fade into another story that disappeared as quickly as it began. And as the car rolled forward another inch, Aaliyah knew that whatever came next would not be about proving anything anymore. It would be about making sure this moment was not ignored. The car rolled forward another foot, slow enough that the movement felt intentional rather than reactive, and Aaliyah kept her eyes on the road ahead, but her awareness remained anchored in the moment behind her, in the reflection of flashing lights that still lingered across the windshield like a memory refusing to fade. Her fingers adjusted slightly on the steering wheel, not tightening, not trembling, just steady. And that steadiness carried something deeper now, something formed not from comfort but from clarity. She could leave. She knew that. The street ahead was open, empty enough to disappear into within seconds, but leaving without acknowledgement felt incomplete, like closing a door that had just been forced open. Her gaze flickered once to the side mirror, catching a final glimpse of the scene she was about to leave behind. The officers standing still, the crowd thinning further, the tension dissolving into something quieter but not resolved, and she realized that silence was already trying to reclaim the moment, trying to smooth it over, to make it smaller than it was. Aaliyah eased her foot back onto the brake, the car coming to a gentle stop once more, and for a second the only sound was the low hum of the engine, steady and controlled, matching the rhythm of her breathing. She turned her head slightly, just enough to look through the driver's side window, her eyes finding Officer Hayes again, not searching, not confronting, just seeing. And in that brief moment their gaze aligned, not with authority, not with defiance, but with something that acknowledged what had happened without pretending it had not. Outside, Hayes shifted his stance, a subtle movement that carried uncertainty, and though he did not step closer, the distance between them felt different now, no longer defined by control, but by consequence. Aaliyah's hand moved from the steering wheel to the door handle, her fingers resting there for a second before she pushed it open, the soft click breaking the quiet in a way that felt deliberate. And as she stepped out, the night air met her again, cooler than before, sharper, carrying the weight of everything that had unfolded. She closed the door behind her gently, not with force, not with hesitation, and stood beside the car once more. But this time there were no cuffs, no commands, no assumptions dictating where she could stand. Her posture remained straight, her expression calm, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, clear enough to reach beyond the officers, beyond the remaining bystanders. "This did not just happen," she said, not loudly, but firmly, each word placed with intention, and the simplicity of it cut deeper than anything dramatic could have. The statement did not accuse, did not escalate. It simply refused to let the moment shrink into something forgettable, and for a second no one responded, not because they did not hear her, but because there was nothing immediate to say against it. The air held still again, not tense this time, but aware, and Aaliyah let the silence sit there, knowing it carried more weight than any argument. And as she stood beside the car she had earned, under lights that no longer defined her, she understood with quiet certainty that this was no longer just about proving ownership. It was about refusing to let what had been revealed disappear into nothing, and that choice, more than anything else, was what would shape everything that came next. The words did not echo, they settled, quiet and unmovable, and Aaliyah could feel the shift ripple outward, not loud, not immediate, but undeniable, like something that had been exposed and could no longer be unseen. The remaining bystanders stood still, no longer spectators but witnesses, their posture changed in small ways, arms lowering, shoulders tightening, eyes no longer curious but thoughtful, as if the moment had turned inward on them. Officer Hayes took a slow breath, his gaze lingering on Aaliyah with a weight that had not been there before. Not authority, not control, but something closer to accountability, even if it had not yet found its voice. The second officer shifted beside him, glancing briefly toward the patrol car, then back again, as if unsure where to place himself in a moment that no longer followed the usual pattern. Aaliyah remained where she stood, grounded, her feet planted beside the car, her posture steady. And for the first time since the night had fractured into flashing lights and raised voices, the space around her felt balanced, not equal, not restored, but clear, stripped of assumption. A faint sound of traffic passed in the distance, A reminder that the world beyond this block continued without pause, unaware of how a single moment could carry so much weight, how easily it could have passed unnoticed if not for what had been revealed. Aaliyah's eyes moved slowly across the scene, not searching, not accusing, just observing, taking in the quiet aftermath, the officers standing without direction, the crowd thinning to a few lingering figures, the street returning to something almost normal, but not quite. Her hand brushed lightly against the side of the car, fingertips grazing the surface as if reaffirming its presence, its reality, something solid in contrast to everything that had just unfolded. Hayes finally stepped forward, one measured step, stopping at a respectful distance, his voice lower now, careful. "We should have handled this differently," he said, the words not loud, not performative, but they carried something that had been missing before, acknowledgement, incomplete but real. Aaliyah listened without interrupting, her expression unchanged, because she understood that words, even the right ones, could not reverse what had already been set into motion, but they could reveal something about what came next. She nodded once, not accepting, not dismissing, simply recognizing the statement for what it was, a beginning, not a resolution. The silence that followed felt different again, not heavy, not tense, but open, as if the moment had shifted from confrontation to consequence. A single phone remained raised at the edge of the sidewalk, recording quietly. No commentary, no laughter, just documentation, and Aaliyah noticed it, not with discomfort, but with awareness, because this was not just her moment anymore. It was something that extended beyond her, something that would be seen, replayed, interpreted. She drew in a slow breath, the night air steady in her lungs, and as she exhaled, her shoulders settled into a calm that was no longer about control, but about clarity. She glanced once more at Hayes, then at the car, then at the street ahead, and in that sequence there was a quiet decision forming, not rushed, not reactive, but deliberate, shaped by everything that had just unfolded. Aaliyah stepped back toward the driver's door, her hand resting briefly on the handle again, and though her movement was simple, it carried intention, not just to leave, but to move forward on her own terms, with the understanding that this moment was not ending here. It was only beginning to unfold in ways no one standing in that street could fully see. Yet, her hand remained on the door handle for a second longer than necessary, not because she hesitated, but because she understood that once she sat back inside and drove away, the moment would shift again, from something immediate to something remembered, and she wanted to be certain she carried it forward the right way. The street around her had quieted almost completely now. The earlier tension dissolved into a stillness that felt more reflective than reactive, and the flashing lights, though still present, no longer held the same authority they had minutes ago. Instead, they flickered like a reminder of how quickly perception could take control before truth had a chance to speak. Aaliyah opened the door again and slid into the driver's seat with the same measured calm, pulling it closed gently behind her, sealing herself back into a space that felt entirely hers, untouched by the assumptions that had played out just outside. Her hands returned to the steering wheel, settling into place naturally, and this time there was no pause, no uncertainty in the movement, just quiet intention as her foot pressed lightly against the accelerator, the car easing forward with smooth precision. In the rearview mirror, the scene began to shrink, the officers becoming smaller figures against the backdrop of their own flashing lights. The crowd nearly gone now, leaving behind only the empty stretch of sidewalk where everything had unfolded, and for a brief moment Aaliyah watched it recede, not with relief, but with awareness, because distance did not erase meaning, it only changed perspective. The road ahead opened wider with each passing second, streetlights stretching in a steady line that guided her forward, and the rhythm of driving settled in, grounding her in motion, in control, in something that belonged entirely to her. But her mind did not drift. It remained sharp, clear, replaying the moment not in fragments, but as a whole, each detail aligning into something that felt less like an isolated incident and more like a pattern she could now see more clearly than before. Her grip on the wheel adjusted slightly, her posture straight, her breathing even, and there was no anger in it, no lingering fear, just a quiet, focused resolve that had replaced everything else. A passing car moved in the opposite direction, its headlights briefly illuminating her face through the windshield. And for a second, she caught her reflection again, steady and composed, unchanged in a way that mattered most. She reached one hand briefly toward the center console, her phone resting there, the screen dark, silent. But she knew it would not stay that way for long, because moments like this did not remain contained. They moved, they spread, they found their way into conversations, into questions, into spaces that demanded answers. Her fingers hovered for just a second before pulling back. Not yet, because she understood that what came next required more than reaction. It required intention, clarity, and the same calm she had carried through the entire night. The city moved around her as if nothing had happened, as if the world had not paused even for a second, and yet she carried the weight of it forward, not as something that burdened her, but as something that defined what she would do next. As the car continued down the road, smooth and steady, Aaliyah knew with quiet certainty that the moment behind her was no longer just a memory. It was evidence, and what she chose to do with it would matter far beyond this drive, far beyond this night, in ways that were only just beginning to take shape. The city lights blurred softly past her windows as Aaliyah drove, each block carrying her farther from the scene, yet closer to something she had not fully named yet, a quiet understanding that what had happened was no longer just hers to process. It had already begun to move beyond her, carried in the memory of those who had watched, in the silence of those who had not spoken, and in the single phone that had remained raised until the very end. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel, her posture composed, but her thoughts sharpened with each passing streetlight, not scattered, not overwhelmed, just focused, aligning into something deliberate. She turned onto a quieter road, the hum of the engine smoothing into the background as the world outside grew calmer, less crowded, and for the first time since the lights had flashed behind her, there was space to think without interruption, without the weight of eyes or voices pressing in. Her gaze flicked briefly to the dashboard, then to the center console where her phone rested, still dark, still silent, but no longer neutral. It felt like something waiting, something that would connect this moment to everything beyond it. She reached for it again, this time not hesitating, her fingers wrapping around it with the same calm control she had carried all night. And as the screen lit up, it reflected faintly in her eyes, a small glow against the steady focus in her expression. Notifications had not yet flooded in, the world had not caught up yet, but she knew it would, because moments like this did not stay contained. They surfaced, they spread, they forced themselves into conversations that people could not easily avoid. She unlocked the phone, her thumb moving with quiet precision, not rushing, not reacting, just choosing. And for a second she paused on the screen, considering not what had happened, but what it meant, what it would become if she allowed it to be seen clearly. Her reflection flickered faintly across the glass, layered over the interface, and she saw herself there again, composed, grounded, unchanged in the way that mattered most, and that steadiness guided her next movement. She navigated to her camera roll, the empty space waiting, then to the camera itself, but she did not immediately record. She let the moment settle once more, ensuring that what she would say would not come from impulse, but from clarity. The car slowed slightly as she approached a red light, the glow casting a steady wash of color across the interior. And as she came to a stop, the stillness returned, not forced, not tense, just present. Outside, the intersection was empty, quiet, and inside the car, Aaliyah lifted the phone just slightly, positioning it without overthinking, her face framed by the dim light of the dashboard and the faint reflection of the streetlights ahead. Her thumb hovered over the record button for a fraction of a second, not out of doubt, but out of understanding, because once she pressed it, this moment would no longer belong only to her. It would belong to anyone willing to see it. She took a slow breath, her shoulders settling, her eyes steady on the screen, and in that quiet pause, everything aligned, the night behind her, the road ahead, and the choice she was about to make. And as the light outside shifted from red to green, her thumb pressed down, and the story began to move forward in a way that would reach far beyond the street where it started. The green light glowed ahead, steady and quiet, but Aaliyah did not move right away. Her eyes focused on the screen in front of her, the small red recording icon now active, capturing everything without interruption. Without judgment, just recording the truth as it was. Her reflection looked back at her through the camera, calm, composed, not rehearsed, and for a second she simply breathed, letting the moment settle fully before speaking, because she knew this was not about reacting. It was about stating something clearly enough that it could not be dismissed. "My name is Aaliyah Carter," she began, her voice even, controlled, carrying none of the tension from earlier, only clarity. "And tonight I was put in handcuffs next to a car that belongs to me." She did not raise her tone, did not rush her words. She let them land one by one. Simple, undeniable. No one asked me a question before they made that decision. And as she said it, her gaze remained steady on the lens, not searching for sympathy, not asking for validation, just presenting what had happened as it was. The light outside shifted again as a car passed through the intersection, but inside her vehicle everything felt still, contained. Within the quiet space she had created, and she continued. "I showed them the truth, and the truth did not change. It was already there." Her fingers adjusted slightly around the phone, holding it steady, grounding herself in the act of speaking. But the moment still happened, and that sentence lingered just a fraction longer, carrying more weight than the ones before it. She did not fill the silence immediately. She allowed it to exist, to give space for what she had just said to settle, and then she added, softer now, but no less firm, "This is not about a mistake. This is about assumption." And with that, the meaning sharpened, defined, impossible to blur into something more comfortable. Outside, the intersection remained quiet, the world continuing as if nothing had shifted, but inside the frame of that camera, something had been set into motion that would not fade as easily. Aaliyah's expression did not change. Her posture remained steady, and she finished not with anger, not with accusation, but with clarity. "I am sharing this because moments like this do not just disappear, they stay with you, and they need to be seen." Her thumb hovered near the screen again, but she did not stop recording just yet. She held the silence one more time, letting the weight of her words remain present, unbroken, and as the light outside turned green once more and the road ahead opened, she knew that what she had just said was no longer confined to this car, to this street, or to this night. It was already moving outward, carrying the truth with it in a way that could not be quietly set aside. Her thumb finally moved, tapping the screen to stop the recording, and for a brief moment the silence inside the car returned, deeper now, fuller, as if everything she had just said still lingered in the air around her. The video sat there on her screen, a simple file, no larger than a few seconds of footage, but it carried more weight than anything else from the night, because it was clear, it was controlled, and most importantly, it was hers. Aaliyah looked at it for a second, not replaying it, not questioning it, just acknowledging what it was, a piece of truth captured without distortion, without interruption, and she knew that once it left her phone, it would take on a life of its own, moving through timelines, through conversations, through people who had never stood on that street, but would now see it as if they had. Her fingers hovered over the screen, not hesitating, but choosing carefully. And then with a quiet motion she selected share, the action simple, almost ordinary. Yet it carried a finality that marked the true turning point of the night. Outside, the road remained open, the green light still glowing ahead, but now it felt different, not just a path forward, but a continuation of something already set in motion. As the video uploaded, a small progress bar moving steadily across the screen. Aaliyah rested her hand lightly on the steering wheel again, her posture relaxed but grounded, her eyes steady, because she understood that what came next would not be immediate, not instant, but inevitable. Somewhere, someone would see it. Then another, and the moment that had tried to define her in silence would begin to speak on its own, reaching far beyond the few people who had stood there watching. The upload completed with a soft notification, almost quiet enough to miss. But Aaliyah saw it, felt it, and in that instant something shifted once more, not around her, but outward, into a world that had not yet reacted but soon would. She placed the phone back on the console, not checking it again, not waiting for responses, because she was not looking for approval, not looking for validation. She had already done what mattered. Her foot pressed gently on the accelerator, the car moving forward through the intersection. Smooth and controlled, the city opening up ahead of her once more, unchanged on the surface, but different in a way that could not be seen yet. Streetlights passed one by one, their glow steady against the windshield, and as she drove, Aaliyah did not look back again, not at the mirror, not at the moment behind her, because she knew it was no longer behind her. It was moving forward now, just like she was. The engine's hum filled the quiet space, constant and even, and her hands remained steady. On the wheel, her focus clear, her breathing calm. Everything aligned in a way that felt deliberate rather than accidental. And somewhere beyond the reach of her headlights, beyond the stretch of road she could see, the truth she had carried through the night was already beginning to reach people who had never met her, never stood in that moment, but would soon understand it, not as a headline, not as a rumor, but as something real, something undeniable. And as the car disappeared into the steady rhythm of the city, one quiet thought remained, clear and unshaken. Sometimes the moment that tries to reduce you is the very moment that reveals exactly who you are.